Okay, it says I'm unmuted.
I can hear you.
Okay. Um, uh, Andy Tilton, as part of the Pond Watch series, we're going to discuss a little bit about erosion today. Couple of thoughts. Are you losing something and where is it going? Hopefully I'll be able to answer some of that as we go through this and give some possible solutions. The group is Lee County, the Pond Watch through the Lee County Highest Control, Native Plant Society, GHD and Johnson Engineering and others have come together to help with this educational effort. I'm with Johnson Engineering and I appreciate all the help I get from the others. A couple of housekeeping items. If you want to send a message or ask questions, please feel free to use the chat option. The other is that you can unmute yourself and ask a question either at the end or you can ask during the presentation. Moving into some of the discussions, some of the things that you'll need to do to be able to address the stormwater ponds that are in your community. This is a spreadsheet, kind of a flow chart that was developed several years ago. Much of it's still applicable, and I'm going to focus on stormwater pond improvement portion with the next slide. And that is that the first thing that needs to be done besides figuring out, some of your pond issues is what are some of the permits that were required to allow your pond to be constructed and how should it be operated under those. Most of the ponds are within a South Florida Water Management District permit. Today it's called an environmental resource permit. Years ago it may have been a stormwater management permit. They're very similar. Secondly, most likely the pond was developed under some kind of a local permit from the city or the county, oftentimes called a development order or a site development permit. Then in some communities, there's a homeowners association or a community development district or both. One of those two, if you have both, one of those two is responsible for the operation and maintenance. You need to find out which one it is and any restrictions that they may have. Once you've figured out the permitting side of it, then you can start figuring out how to discuss with the maintenance entity, whether that's the HOA or the CDD, things that need to be done to improve the health of the pond, and in this case, specifically erosion issues. Another tool that may help you is to go to the wet plan website. There's a survey available on there that will help you kind of organize some of your thoughts and the way you might approach doing improvements, fixes, remediation for your pond. In stormwater pond design, these are things that you probably have very little control over, but just so that you understand what maybe should be there or maybe shouldn't be there. Some of the things is that the stormwater pond is there as a treatment system, and it deals with flood protection, not only on site, but also so that there's a controlled release of water and not flooding someone downstream. It also should provide you with some aesthetics. It could be in the form of just visual or in bird watching. Also, a well-maintained pond should increase your property value. Some common items that you need to understand, but you probably had little or no control over because you bought in a community that already had a pond that was developed, is how was it designed by somebody at some point? There's the side slope on the pond that you see In this pond, you see it's grassed in this area, and then there's littoral plantings. So you have the grass up in this area. In some cases, and you'll see some pictures later, this may not be turf grass. It may be what could be referred to as a buffer of plants that you generally don't maintain, but maybe once a year, either taller grasses or other types of plants in that area. You have the control elevation. That's a set point, but the water level will go up and down throughout the year. And that's the reason this same side slope, one horizontal to 4 vertical, or one horizontal to 6 vertical, I'm sorry, 1 vertical to 6 horizontal. Those are 2 very common slopes depending on when your pond was designed and developed. This break point where the side slope gets steeper, one vertical to 2 horizontal, varies from anywhere from 2 feet below the control to 6 feet below control. And again, it depends on what municipality it was designed within, and also when it was designed, because some of these values have changed through time. That's the reason you go back to your permits to find out what was permitted for your particular pond. In stormwater pond design, continuing, as we talked about, there's state, local, federal guidelines. Side slopes can be different based on when it was designed and in which community. Typically, a typical pond from control elevation is 12 feet at the deepest. There's also ponds that are deeper, and if they're deeper, especially within Lee County, they require an additional design feature for a deep water pond. Usually requires more littoral plantings and trees in the plantings, as well as some type of artificial aeration. There are some minimum width and minimum area requirements. All of those are already done when you buy into the community. Littoral plantings, while they're encouraged by many agencies, very few of them require them. Although Lee County has some minimal requirements, they're probably, if only the minimum is done, they're probably not sufficient to do the actual protection from erosion that's needed. Some of the results of that are from erosion around, for instance, on the left, there's a pipe with a mitered end section. This erosion here, a lot of it's from the water coming out of the pipe, and there was nothing to take the energy from that flowing water and disperse it and use it other than the soil that was around the end of this pipe. So that soil is now farther out into the stormwater pond. Another common, very common erosion type is from wave action, and that's what is visible here in this pond, small pond, is this vertical escarpment, and then this somewhat flat area, and that's because the dirt on the side slope has eroded and created this flatter area. You can see in the background where this cypress tree is growing, and their cypress knees have protected that shoreline from the wave action, and actually that side slope is still fairly well intact. In looking at them, and I've labeled this as a fix, this is just to show 2 things. One, that wave action creates this more vertical face and eats away at this slope and leaves somewhat of a flattened slope, and actually will push some dirt out into the pond area here usually. So that even makes this flatter area wider. One of the fixes, and we'll get into several other fixes, is to use geotubes. And the correct way to do the geotubes is to do a series of tubes depending on the size of this hole and how big this escarpment is, so that none of these tubes are too big and leave a lot of vertical space. Also, putting a sacrificial tube up here on the top and then breaking it open and spreading that dirt to reestablish this slope is important. To hold that dirt in place, you generally want some sort of a covering, and even more than just the sod or the buffer plants, also more than just the littoral plants, because when the littoral plants are first put in, they're spaced apart. Even if they're a foot apart, there's still a lot of opportunity for wave action. So you want to protect that with some kind of a geofabric that is good for a year or two. In looking at different costs, I mean, obviously the least expensive is to keep the pond maintained so you don't have erosion. If you have some erosion, and to that, if you have no littoral plants, that's probably the least cost, and it's probably $5 to $10 a lineal foot if you hire it done. If you have some volunteers that do some of it, you can make that cost close to zero. Geotube restoration projects, turf reinforcement mats, geoweb with gravel or plants, riprap, rubble. These all have a much higher per lineal foot cost and also have design features, as well as some of them in certain jurisdictions, including Lee County unincorporated, may have to have some changes to your development order or changes, administrative changes that allow you to have these, especially behind residences, because some of these are considered hardening. The littoral plants, they give you, there's a lot of options. There's dozens of plants. The Native Plant Society can help a lot. Some of the vendors that sell plants can help a lot with that in both plants that are in this littoral zone, as well as plants that would work well up the slope in a buffer area, to not to have turf grass all the way to the edge. As we've said, it looks natural. It's less expensive, cheaper, however you want to say that option. Seasonally, often these plants will provide flowers, which provide encouragement for butterflies, birds, etc. Maintenance requirements tend to be a little bit less, and it also provides habitat, as we've talked about. Some of the other restorations, the geotube that we've talked about a moment ago, here's some photographs of it actually being constructed with filter fabric, and then the geotubes. Basically, this boat is used to help the diver pump sandy material from the bottom of the pond and put it in the tubes. Then, as I talked about, the sacrificial tube, and then they spread the dirt on the top. So you end up with a beach looking area before you cover it with some kind of plants. This case, they chose sod. Also, if you're going to create a buffer strip, this would be where you would put the buffer strip. This is a area in Lee County here, actually in the city of Fort Myers, Heritage Palms, that had an erosion problem. It was fixed, and then they did add littoral plants. You can see the look of it. The fix is still there as far as the erosion, and the littoral plants have kept that from eroding and going back to what it looked like 14 years ago. If you don't put the littoral plants and/or the geotube is too large, you will get this bullnose effect, which may or may not fit what you want aesthetically, but it still gives a very large vertical and doesn't generally meet the requirements for compliance with your water management district permit. And so it needs to be fixed. Also, you can see over time, the geofabric that holds the sand together can fail, can start to get holes in it. Also, there's safety issues from whether it's walking or trying to mow this area. If you get too close with a lawnmower, one can go off the edge and it doesn't return easily. Another option is using a turf reinforcement mat, which once it's installed is completely hidden by vegetation. It's much more expensive, but it's also a very durable product. So if some of the vegetation goes away for short periods of time, the bank stays in place. It's relatively easy to install once the bank has been fixed, and that's where you may still want to use a geotube to move material from the pond up to fix the slope, and then you cover it with this turf reinforcement mat. Geoweb with gravel or with other things is an option. This is one that requires some design features. Here's an option where it was put with gravel, but the gravel was too small. And within a year, a lot of the gravel had been taken out of the geoweb area and ended up in the pond. Now, the geoweb and the underlying filter fabric maintain the slope, but now you have to come back and repair it again because it was too small a stone for the wave actions of that particular pond. This is a couple of examples of some riprap, rubble riprap material. It can be very durable. It's more costly. One of the challenges is during construction, getting the material to the pond site from a roadway. Also, there's design issues that go with it. This is an example where it doesn't appear there was any filter fabric under the riprap. Also, it didn't go far enough down the bank, and the wave action worked under the riprap, and the riprap has collapsed and gone into the pond partially. This is an example of a better installation. Also, some littoral plants in front of it help to break up its artificial look. And so you have stability as well as some habitat here with the spike rush in front of it. Some other features that you could have in ponds that'll be discussed in later presentations could be bubblers or fountains or other custom water features. These have a lot more effect on water quality and aesthetics than they do with erosions, but they're things to come. And with that, I'll open it up to questions that people may have. And this photograph shows a very nice non-mow buffer strip here behind this home. Thank you.
I have a question, if I may.
Go.
Okay, so Andy, one question that comes to my mind is that in Lee County, maybe city or the county, does that allow, do they allow to have 100% riprap around the pond? And what is the limitation of how much riprap? Or okay, before that, there's something called hardening, and there's another soft shore. What is the percentage that the county allows as far as hard shore versus soft shore?
Generally, well, to start out with, there's different of the products and fixes we talked about. If you're doing an installation with geotube or riprap, those are considered hardening under the county rules and regulations. Turf reinforcement mat and the geoweb with or without gravel are not considered hardening. If it's hardening, then that's where you have to go through an administrative approval process to get the solution that you want to use approved, because hardening is not allowed behind residential areas at all without the special approval. It can be used along golf courses and non-residential areas. Also, the Water Management District here locally, the South Florida Water Management District has a 40% rule that says if you're going to harden more than 40%, that you have to have some compensating littoral areas. So you may have to do some other construction to be able to do that.
Great.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Go ahead.
We have littoral plants around our pond, but there have gotten a lot of weeds in them. How do you deal with the weeds in the littoral plants without killing the littorals?
That is always a challenge, and if they're, and that's where if the maintenance is started early on those, it helps because they could actually be hand removed, but that's the most expensive way to do it, but it's the least damaging on the rest. Also, you can do spot treatment of them, but depending on the type of herbicide that's used, and that's where you have to work with your contractor very carefully. Some of those tend to translocate through the soil and the water, and so you have to be careful that you're not killing the things that you want to save. So you're asking a great question. It can be a challenge to do that, but a good contractor can provide you with a variety of solutions that can be used. Also, if you have volunteers that can be trained on which plants are good and which plants are those to leave and those to take out, you could actually do some volunteer work. Just like I mentioned on the littoral plantings, there are some places that volunteers have planted the littoral plants. And again, they lowered the cost because they volunteered their time.
Unfortunately, I was just going to say, unfortunately, because of the slope, we don't have a flat slope the way you have in this picture. So, and we've got alligators in the pond. So I don't know that volunteers could help.
Well, and that's always a comfort level on, even when there's a 4-to-1 side slope, some people say, well, that's too steep for them to walk on. And so I understand that's partially why Lee County has gone to a requirement of a 6-to-1 slope, which is flatter, 6 horizontal to 1 vertical.
Thank you, Andy.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have a very, well, I don't know if it's very old, but we have an old pond that's more than 40 years old. And over the years, people have, behind their properties, have been allowed to harden it. Some are straight up walls, a couple are riprap. Where do we stand? Is the county going to ever come around? I guess we should avoid the county ever coming out here, right? But what about things that were done like many years ago? If the county comes, would they make us rip that out, or we just should obviously not permit anymore, right?
Well, I will go back to kind of where I started, and that is, first of all, look at what your permits are, because a lot of the newer communities wouldn't be allowed to do those things. But it's possible that because of when your community was developed and what the rules were at the time, it's possible that some of those things could have been allowed. So you would need to figure out what each of those different types of permits allowed at the time. If it was a newer development and somebody had put those things in, yes, the county through code enforcement could come out and say your property, this property is no longer in compliance and require it to be changed. The water management district likewise under compliance could say that the community is no longer in compliance with their permit. But if it's old enough, it may not be that it was against the permit at that time, so you may be okay.
How do I find out what our permits are? We don't have any records going back that far. How do I find out what our permits are? Where do I go? What do I do?
Okay, at the water management district level, it can be done online.
Okay.
And you go to sfwmd.gov and then look for permits, which is actually the second. I think it's doing business with the district, and then under that is permitting, and then there is under permitting they have a sub item of e-permitting, and there you can open up, you can search for applications and permits, and there's a whole drop-down screen, and you only have to fill in 1 or 2 lines there. In other words, like the name of your community.
Mm-hmm.
The only hiccup that you run into there is it's got to be the name that it was permitted under. So if the community was permitted under, I'll give you an example. West Bay Club in South Lee County was actually permitted originally under Estero Point. And so now there's some more, the good thing there is there's more recent permits that have been done under West Bay Club, and then you can go backwards through that permit number and be able to find the early ones that were done under Estero Point. But so that's a little bit of a hiccup. If you have some problems, I would call the Water Management District office locally at 338-2929 and just ask for some help.
Okay.
And then at the county level, that's through the Development Review Group. And they too have some online things that can be done. But again, if you run into difficulties, I would just call them up and get some guidance and help on how to find what relates to your particular subdivision. Because every subdivision, it is got some nuances of its own, especially over time, things have changed.
Right. My fear was calling for help might get somebody out here, and then we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense or something, you know, if they come and say, oh, you're out of compliance, you know.
Well, and I'm not going to tell you that can't happen, but you can just ask some general questions on how you search for things.
Okay.
And not reveal where you're at until you figure out what kind of damage you might be doing to yourself. I too live in a subdivision that's under permit, and I oftentimes tell my neighbors to call me first before they call the Water Management District or the county.
All right. Thank you very much, Andy. You've been very helpful.
Andy and Karen, I just wanted to throw out there too that Lee Simmons, who is going to be one of our speakers in a couple months, passed along a county permitting website that I've posted in the chat box. So you can go to the chat box and copy that out of there. And I think it's a little bit easier to use than the South Florida Water Management District site, which is not easy to use at all.
Okay.
This one is much more helpful, I think.
Where's the chat box at?
Do you have a
Zoom screen?
I don't see a chat.
At the bottom of your screen, maybe?
Tap your cursor on the screen.
Your picture is in the bottom of my screen because it's on share screen. So
it's either at the bottom or at the side. If you tap, you should be able to see it.
Yeah, I can't get to the bottom of my screen.
Go to the top of your screen, and in the upper right hand side, what does it say? Speaker view
more
or exit?
It says, oh, the right hand side says more. Oh, there it is. It's under more. Okay, thank you so much, chat. Okay.
Okay.
So this is the LegalGovCom DCD DSC search. That's the one you're talking about.
Correct.
Yes,
All right. Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
And they have developed a very nice website. I'll have to say that it's one of the better ones.
So if anyone's having trouble asking a question, you could always chat the question in the chat box too. Keep that in mind.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that.
I don't see any other questions, Andy.
I got another question, if I may take advantage of Andy to be present here. Andy, did you know, okay, so there's some structures that are like to say hardening, and some of them are not allowing, they're not easy to plant littorals right in front. Some of them and is that a restriction? What will be the alternatives if you are not allowed to, not allowed, but it's not easier to plant some of those littorals? Do you have any other suggestions as far as protecting those shorelines? Although the riprap, but doesn't maybe need the plants because it's rock is going to be hardening and no problem. But geoweb and geotubes might have the problem.
Well, you bring up a great point that geotube by definition is a hardening in the Lee County rules and regulations. But if it's done well with a sacrificial tube on the top that provides more dirt material to smooth that slope out, and then some sort of lesser geofabric put over the top of it to protect the slope. One of the things with geotube that's a challenge is that the soils, when they're brought up from the bottom of the pond, are segregated. And so they're more erodible than the native soil was that the pond started with. And so that's the reason that you need to put some sort of a protective geofabric over the top of it. One of the ones that I've used fairly successfully is a cocoa mat, where it's a very open geofabric. It may be 1 inch, look almost like a nylon mesh, and then the cocoa fibers are attached to that. It only lasts for a year or two, but it's long enough to protect that soil to give the littoral plants 1 or 2 seasons to grow in and be that wave protection that you need along that shoreline. And when I mentioned earlier that the minimal plantings by the county aren't sufficient, typically they only require 1 row of plants. I would recommend at least 5 rows of plants and stagger the plants so that you get as much coverage as you can on that shoreline. I would also use a minimum of 3 types of plants along there in that littoral zone, because different soils will allow the plants to grow better. And so rather than trying to figure out which plant it is, I usually put in at least 3 types of plants so that the conditions in that pond may dictate one of those may just flourish really well and others may die back. But it gives you that option to grow in a good set of plants.
Andy, I have a question. How long does it take for the littorals to take?
Generally, the littorals are, whether you grow them yourself or you're buying them or having them planted, are rooted already. And so as long as they don't wash out or get pulled out by fish or animals, they generally will take within a month or so. It's sort of like laying sod. After a month or so, it should be rooted. Now, for them to expand, it may take months or a year or 2 before they start to expand and grow additional plants, either through seeding or through root rhizomes that allow other plants to come up.
And when do we plant them?
Ernesto may be able to give a better answer. I've seen them planted at all times of the year.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you plant them in the March, April, May timeframe, you've got a longer warm period for them to grow. Planting them in the fall or through our short winter, they will generally survive, but they don't generally expand very well. And so it may look like it takes them longer to get started.
Correct. Besides also, depends also on the fluctuation of your pond. Normally ponds will be pretty low on the dry season, and that winter is gonna be horrible for those plants who were planted right now in the fall. So you don't want to do fall planting expecting that the water will be down, and then you will have these plants drying pretty much. If you plant on the spring, there will be the best chances for the plants to survive, to get acquainted with their soil, and then start expanding.
And are we actually planting them in the water?
It depends on when and where that water level is. If you start planting them in, and that would be part of your research, is figuring out where the control elevation is on your pond as set by your water control structure. From that, you can figure out where to put the plants and what type of plants, and that some plants are taller than others. And so you need to do a little bit of planning for that. But if you plant them in March, April, May, when the water levels are the lowest, usually May the water levels are the lowest, and they start coming back up in June and July. You can actually plant them in the dry, but they'll go underwater in June, July, August, September.
Thank you.
Andy, I would like to mention that next month we are going to have Chad Washburn from the Naples Botanical Garden, and he's going to talk in our next webinar about littoral plants and plantings to improve water quality, and preserve the shoreline and make it look beautiful. And that is going to take place on December 2nd, same time that today, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. A teaser for our next one.
Yeah.
And let's mention too that we are recording this session and it'll be posted on the website. So if there's something you forgot and you want to check back, you'll be able to listen to this again or pass it on to your friends so they can listen.
You can also go to our web. Sorry, you can also go to our website or to our Facebook account and make us a question if you want there.
I was going to say that. Thank you, Maria.
Okay. Oh, I had one more question, Andy.
Yes.
If I wanted to take some spike rush from an area where it's, growing, is it easy to transplant, to dig up and transplant, or is it going to die if I try and move it?
It is relatively movable. You just want to make sure you get the roots and some rhizome with it, so that when you move it, it's not just the top of the plant. If you just pull the top of the plant, then you're going to end up with nothing to grow unless you do some sort of rooting. You want something with roots.
Right, but it's not so delicate that it can't be transplanted then.
No, there are actually some contractors that have wetland locations that they have permission and permits to harvest, and they actually will harvest these plants from those areas and bring them to these ponds to install them. So that's an option. I mean, there are some areas that you have to have permits to do that, to harvest them, but and there's others that grow them in nurseries. So there's and also I know through the Native Plant Society, they have had in the past some educational programs on harvesting seeds from plants and then planting them and then putting them out. Obviously, you're not going to do that in a month's time, but if you're planning ahead over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, those kind of things can be used and again, change the cost if people are willing to work along the pond bank.
And keep in mind, it is always illegal to harvest plants from any property that's not your own without permission. So stopping along the roadside, even if they're scraping out ditches or something, it is illegal to grab those plants.
Okay. Well, for our own lake, we should be allowed to do it, right?
You should certainly be able to use areas where the littorals are very thick and be able to take parts of them and move them to other locations. but just be careful about thinning them too much and allowing weeds to come through.
Okay, thank you.
How long does it take to put this on the webcam to review it? Does it happen immediately as soon as we're finished, or is it a day later, or?
I'll probably have it posted later today.
Thank you.
I got a recommendation, maybe a suggestion for some of the people who are having problems with erosion. They probably don't know that until they start seeing, of course, you can see the scarment and everything. But if you go to a website called the LEEPA, is the property, the Lee County Property Appraiser website, they have a GIS photography of the whole county, and you can see in previous years the amount of dirt that you have been losing in the pond by clicking out. Every year the Lee County take up pictures of the whole county, so you can see your pond has been losing dirt if you go to so many years before, and you can see even the littorals were present and now they're gone. And it's a great resolution. It's a great mapping tool. I'll put it in the everyone chat so you guys can see and then use it as a tool for determining how bad the erosion and where are the locations of those erosion problems.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Ernesto.
Also, individually, if you have a survey that was done of your property when you acquired the property, and your property is adjacent to the stormwater pond, oftentimes the surveyor will locate the edge of the water or the edge of the pond in that survey. And so that also can be a tool, at least adjacent to your property. It wouldn't show you the whole pond, obviously.
So I had a question, Andy, on maintenance. You know, how often would I want to ask my contractors to come in and keep those weeds out and that kind of stuff?
Most communities have somebody there on a monthly basis, and that is so that things don't get very far awry. They may do very little each month, but they will tend to catch problems much sooner that way. If there's kind of as a parallel in wetland maintenance, oftentimes the people are only there quarterly or semi-annually because oftentimes the things there change much more slowly. But not so much wave erosion. That doesn't happen overnight usually, unless you have a big storm. But real erosion around between buildings and around pipes and things can occur fairly quickly, and you want to get those addressed as soon as possible.
Thanks.
And again, it partially depends on how much you want to pay. If you've got people within the community that are very interested in the ponds, you could actually do some of those observations with volunteers. And then if they find something, then take it to the HOA or CDD manager and say, here's a photo of between George's house and Mary's house of where there's some erosion around a pipe. We need to get this fixed. And then management can take care of that. So that's another option. And then you could spread out the times that the contractor's actually on site.
I would like to point one more thing, and it's not to, there's some web, in our website, the webplan.org, we have some videos that has been presented by other homeowners who have problems with erosion. You can go there and then just click on the area where it says resources down to videos, and you will find several videos there. And some of them are talking about this issue on erosion. So if you want to listen to some other homeowners with how they deal with that, by all means attend that, look at those website videos.
I have another question. Our water management company deals with the water, not the erosion. Who's supposed to notice that?
Again, it depends on what's in their contract and what they're supposed to do. And if they're only contracted to do a particular part and it's not looking at the whole of the pond, then you get what is paid for. And that's a challenge at times. And sometimes, and you're doing a great job by learning about this from the standpoint, you can add to the homeowners association managers list, okay, we don't want just X done, we want X, Y, and Z done on the pond to make it function as, because it is a treatment system. That's the thing that Ernesto kind of went over in the last webinar, was that these are treatment systems and they have a function physically. At the same time, we can make them look more like a natural lake or pond, but they actually are a treatment facility and a stormwater attenuation facility, surge tank, if you will. And so that's really important, that you're able to relate that to your manager and say, you know, yes, they're taking care of the water qualities, really looks good. Aesthetically, it looks good, but we're starting to have erosion. We're starting to have these problems, and we need either you, the manager, or you need to add it to the list of things for the contractor to do, to say, okay, these things are occurring and they need to be addressed.
Thank you.
So just on a timing point of view, we have a little over 10 minutes left. So if we have more questions, we'd be happy to answer them. The other thing I wanted to mention, if you go to wetplan.org, scroll down a little bit on the first page, you'll see a link to take the survey. And Andy mentioned that earlier. It's our Healthy Pond survey, and you can take that survey, take a walk around your pond, even take pictures of your pond and upload them to that survey. That comes directly to the wet plan team, and we can help you answer any questions you might have from that. So it's a great idea to take a walk around your pond and do that survey to see, you know, what issues are there and what may be coming that you haven't noticed yet.
And thanks, Andy, for the presentation. I think it was very informative. And just a reminder, Maria, you said that we have Chad Washburn next month on the first Wednesday of the month from Naples Botanical Garden, talking about littoral plants. And then in January or February, we have Lee Simmons with Lee County. Is that correct, Maria?
Yes.
Sorry, I
Oh.
couldn't unmute.
Sorry.
Yes, that is correct. We will have PD, Lee Simmons, in February, and in January we will have a presentation about how to fertilize around the pond, how to fertilize smart, which is a little different when you live like close, not even next to the pond, but close to the pond, can be different. Yep. So the next one would be Chad Washburn, and that's going to be a good presentation to learn more about which plants work in this area and, you know, how to install them. And so he's going to look at the looks too and how they're cleaning the water. So we will take a deeper insight, you know, a deeper look to the plantings.
Perfect. Thanks.
And in the chat, I just sent a link to our workshop page, which gives you all the dates.
Thank you, Karen. Another thing is, like the picture that's on the screen now with the buffer area and the littoral plantings, one of the things that's missing that could be there is trees. And they offer not only some shade, but also offer a visual break for the littorals. And the one pond picture that I had earlier that had a cypress tree there, the good and the bad of cypress trees is that they have knees and they do very good job of stabilizing the bank. They also add a challenge when you're walking around them to not trip over the knees. But so you just need to think about how that tree might interact. And there are other trees, maple trees and gum trees that do really well in that near shore area. Other trees may not be as good a choice there. There's also, and the Native Plant Society, I know Marlene works a lot with them and represents them. They can give some offerings of different trees that might be planted along there. Also in the shrub area, like the pond apple is one, bayberry myrtle can be used. So there's some different ones that are natives that do very well in that near shore area.
Ernesto, do you want to talk about coconuts that fall into the lake from the palm trees near the lake?
Yeah. I can. In fact, I did a little study several years ago when we were helping a community and we found so many coconuts floating around. And I took those coconuts and put it in that area, and I kind of calculated how much phosphorus was produced by that. And it was significant, just to say the least. There's a lot of oils that are in the inside of the coconut, and as they decompose, they're gonna be contributing to phosphorus, and they just float around, and they're just releasing the phosphorus. So it's just anecdotal information.
That's
I have an opinion. Ernesto, this is Greg. I have an opinion on coconuts. My brother told me when I moved to Florida 20 years ago, don't plant any coconuts. I wished I would have listened. I've got three left.
I get them out of the pond.
It's a pain in the, and one other experience I wanted to mention about the planting littorals. Twice I've had them planted before rainy season, and well, I've had them planted like 4 or 5 times, but 2 times all the rain came and just drowned them. When we first got here in the fall, I decided to harvest spike rush in some other ponds and put them in by the lake, which you've been at. And in the dry season, I watered them, and everybody made fun of me because I'm watering the lake. But they went pretty good in the wintertime, but I had to water them. So anyway, end of my opinions of anything. But you've done a very good job, everybody, with this. I like it a lot better than going to someplace to a meeting, and obviously nowadays with COVID, and hopefully we'll gain more people attending because it's been very interesting.
And you bring up a very good point, and that is, and I have actually had contractors do what you did. If they have to install them in the dry season, is to put in, and usually they'll just lay line right on top of the ground and do an irrigation system with water from the pond. And then once the next wet season gets started and they're able to survive on their own, they'll pull up that irrigation system and just take it out completely.
I use that little hose, I think it's called a soaker hose.
Right.
Yeah.
All of those things work well, and they certainly can be done by a contractor, but they just raise the cost of putting those plants in, that's all.
And I just wanted to follow up on the coconut idea. The coconut is listed on the invasive exotic list by the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. So don't be laughing, Ernesto. So we really don't recommend that you plant coconuts. If they are planted, then we recommend, strange as it sounds, a coconut management plan.
That makes sense. I got to tell you, I live on a tidal lake. It's actually a lake because I'm on the 8 lakes in Cape Coral, and I'm in the corner of the lake. And, you know, depending on when the tides come in, I can have hundreds of coconuts at the corner of my lake, and it is not pretty.
What about the palm fronds that fall into the lake from the bottom of the palm trees?
Anything that falls in like that will decay, and to some extent, some of it's good from if it's a native plant, the ponds here will adapt to that. You don't want to put excessive in, and one of the worst things are grass clippings because they decompose very rapidly, and they will increase nutrient problems and other bacteriological problems in the pond. So that's an occasional palm frond I wouldn't worry with, but you certainly don't want to dump vegetation, whether it's leaves or grasses or a large number of palm fronds. The pond is a treatment facility, but it's not designed to treat heavy loads of a lot of vegetation being added to it.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're about 3 minutes out, everyone. Are there any more questions?
I'm leaving you. My wife's calling me for lunch. See you all. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining.
Bye.
All right, so Andy, do you want to do a closing statement and just wrap it up?
Thank you, Karen. Ponds are something that oftentimes the homeowner doesn't get any control over because it's already built and established by the time you get adjacent to it. And even if part of that pond's on your property, the pond itself is probably communal property. And so you want to make sure that you find out what the rules and regulations are before you build something, as one of the people were here before saying that they were concerned about things that were already built having to be taken out, and that can happen. So just find out what the rules were at the time your pond was constructed and what things are allowable today, and go from there, and have fun with it, because it is an important part of your property value.
Well, wonderful. Thanks, Andy. We really appreciate you doing this presentation. It was really informative.
Thank you.
Just everyone remember, go to that www.wetplan.org, and there's lots of resources there. And thanks so much for joining us.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Okay. Oh, Karen?
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Andy.
Good presentation.
Yes.